Sarah Harper stood at the entrance of the Grand Intergalactic Military Academy, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a dream come true. As one of the first human cadets to be accepted into this prestigious academy, she had worked harder than anyone to prove that humans weren't weak. Yet, as she walked past the towering alien cadets, she could feel their eyes on her, judging her. The Academy's halls were lined with statues of heroes from every alien species, each one more terrifying and intimidating than the last. The air smelled of metal and freshly polished floors. The walls were covered with ancient battle strategies from across the galaxy, trophies of war, and relics of long-forgotten civilizations. Sarah's fellow cadets, a mixture of towering insect-like aliens, humanoid beings, and tentacled creatures, all whispered and snickered as she passed by. They didn't think much of the human recruit, a tiny being compared to their massive and powerful physiques. Is she really here to fight? One cadet whispered in an alien tongue. I bet she can't even last 5 minutes in the combat simulations. Another laughed. Sarah ignored them. She had heard these comments for weeks before arriving here. The truth was, most of her fellow students didn't think humans could handle the rigorous training. But Sarah was determined. She wasn't just any human. She had trained herself for years in combat techniques, physical endurance, and survival skills. Nothing would stop her from proving herself. She stood before the main entrance to the Academy's training ground, taking a deep breath. This was it. The beginning of a new chapter. The sound of alien voices echoed around her, their laughter fading into the background. It didn't matter. She was here to prove herself. Inside, the cadets were already assembling. Each of them stood in rows according to their species. The instructors, all experienced warriors, surveyed the cadets with cold, calculating eyes. There was no room for weakness here. Sarah joined the group, standing tall, trying not to show how nervous she felt. The instructor, an intimidating alien with 6 arms and a voice like gravel, stepped forward. "You are here to be tested," he said in a deep, resonant voice. "Not all of you will make it. The galaxy is full of creatures far more dangerous than you can imagine. Only the strongest survive. The rest will fall." He turned his piercing gaze on Sarah, his eyes scanning her. "And you, human, do you really think you belong here?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. Sarah looked him in the eye. She didn't flinch. "I'm here because I belong. I'll prove that to you." The cadets behind her whispered and snickered, but Sarah didn't care. This was her moment, her chance to show the galaxy that humans weren't weak and that she could hold her own among the strongest warriors in the universe. As the instructor gave the signal, the cadets lined up for their first test. Sarah knew this was just the beginning. They might laugh now, but by the end of the training, they would respect her or regret ever doubting her. And she would make sure of it. The sun hung high over the Academy's training grounds, casting long shadows across the harsh terrain. The cadets stood in formation, their eyes focused on the instructor as he called for the first test, physical endurance. Sarah felt the tension rise in her chest. She knew this would be her first real challenge. The test was designed to push them to their limits, an obstacle course that stretched across a desert-like field. The course was filled with steep cliffs, mud pits, high walls to climb, and traps meant to test agility and strength. "Let's see how the human handles this," one cadet muttered, his voice dripping with mockery. Sarah ignored him and took her place at the starting line. The instructor, a tall and muscular alien with silver scales, stood at the front of the course, his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. He seemed to enjoy the tension in the air as the cadets waited for the signal to start. "Ready," he called, his voice echoing across the grounds. "Set, go." The sound of rushing footsteps filled the air as the cadets launched themselves into action. Sarah took a deep breath and followed suit, trying to block out the doubts that crept into her mind. She wasn't like the others. She didn't have their natural advantages. No tough scales, sharp claws, or superhuman strength. All she had was her determination and her will to succeed. The first obstacle was a massive wall, more than 10 feet high. Most of the cadets scaled it with ease, using their powerful limbs to push themselves up. Sarah watched them, trying to calm her nerves. She had to think differently. As she reached the wall, she jumped and grabbed onto the ledge, pulling herself up with her arms. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't impossible either. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain. She had trained for this. By the time she reached the top, the other cadets were already far ahead, some of them halfway through the course. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she swung her legs over the edge, landing hard on the ground below. The next obstacle was a mud pit. The cadets ahead of her barely hesitated as they leaped across, their powerful legs propelling them through the air. Sarah wasn't as fast, but she wasn't about to let that stop her. She crouched down and dove into the thick mud, pushing herself forward, inch by inch. The mud sucked at her boots, trying to drag her down, but Sarah fought against it. Her arms burned, but she kept going. Her mind focused on one thing: finishing the test. It felt like hours, but soon enough, she made it to the other side, drenched in mud and covered in dirt. She could see the other cadets waiting ahead for the final challenge, an open field filled with sharp rocks and low branches. It was the most dangerous part of the course, where the cadets would have to crawl under barbed wire, avoid falling into pits, and navigate the jagged terrain. Sarah's legs felt like lead, but she pushed herself forward, her body moving with all the strength she could muster. She dodged the branches and crawled under the wire, the cold metal biting into her skin. She could hear her heart pounding in her chest, but she didn't stop. Not now. When she finally crossed the finish line, panting and exhausted, the other cadets were already there, looking at her with surprise. Sarah's body felt like it might collapse, but she stood tall, holding her head high. She hadn't given up. The instructor looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned to the others. "You may laugh at the human, but it seems she has a bit more endurance than you think." Sarah didn't care about their mocking anymore. She had done it. She had finished. And in that moment, she knew that this was only the beginning. The academy hadn't seen anything yet. The next day, Sarah stood in front of the simulation room, her hands sweating in anticipation. The walls were lined with monitors, flashing images of different battle scenarios. Alien creatures, hazardous terrains, and warships ready to engage in high-stakes combat. The air inside the room felt heavy, charged with the promise of action. Today, the cadets would begin their first combat simulation. Unlike the obstacle course, this test would evaluate their ability to fight, strategize, and adapt to sudden changes in battle. The instructor had warned them that this was no game. Lives were on the line in real wars, and only the most capable would survive. Sarah looked around at her fellow cadets. They were all confident, talking about the advanced combat techniques their species had perfected over centuries. Sarah knew their strengths. Some were faster, some stronger, and some had enhanced senses. She had none of these advantages. But Sarah had something else: a sharp mind and the ability to think under pressure. The instructor, a towering alien with 3 eyes, stepped into the room. His voice was low and commanding. "This simulation will test your ability to adapt to changing circumstances. You will face a variety of threats, and your mission is to neutralize them using everything at your disposal." The simulation room hummed to life as the lights dimmed. The floor shifted, and the environment changed. Sarah found herself standing in the middle of a jungle-like terrain. Tall trees and thick underbrush surrounded her, and the sounds of alien wildlife echoed in the distance. Her heart raced as she moved, trying to steady her breathing. The other cadets spread out, each one taking a different route through the dense forest. The instructor's voice rang out through their comms. "You are not alone. Be ready for anything." Sarah's senses were alert. She knew the others would rely on brute force and speed, but she couldn't afford that. She needed to rely on strategy. As she walked through the thick underbrush, she noticed the faint sound of something moving behind her. A rustle in the trees. She froze. She ducked behind a large rock, her breathing shallow. The rustling grew louder. Then, from the trees, a creature appeared. A large, reptilian alien with glowing eyes and sharp claws. It was one of the many dangers the cadets would face in the simulation. Most would panic, but Sarah didn't. She crouched low and waited. As the creature neared, she threw a small rock to her left, distracting it. The creature turned, giving her just enough time to grab a nearby branch and swing it like a club, knocking the alien to the ground. It was a basic move, but effective. The creature lay stunned, and Sarah moved quickly to tie it up using vines from the trees. It wasn't a kill, but she knew she had neutralized the threat. As she moved forward, the sounds of combat filled the air. Explosions, blaster fire, and alien roars echoed through the jungle. The others were fighting, using their powers and strengths, but Sarah stayed focused on her objective. She came across a group of cadets fighting a large alien beast. They were struggling to overpower it, their attacks doing little to stop the creature's wild swings. Without hesitation, Sarah ran toward them. "Distract it," she yelled, pulling their attention. She used a combination of quick thinking and her surroundings to help them. She found a weak spot on the creature's underbelly and threw a rock to create a diversion. With the creature distracted, the cadets were able to land a decisive blow. "Good work," one of the cadets said, surprised. Sarah didn't reply. She knew her role wasn't to take all the credit. Her job was to help the team survive and prove that even a human could think on her feet. By the end of the simulation, the cadets who had laughed at her before were no longer mocking her. They were looking at her with respect. As they all stood at the exit, catching their breath, the instructor's voice came through their comms. "Well done, cadets. It's clear that some of you understand the importance of strategy and teamwork. And as for the human cadet," he paused, a smile creeping into his voice. She did not disappoint. As the days passed, Sarah's reputation in the academy began to change. She had proven herself in the physical endurance test and the combat simulation, and while the other cadets no longer openly mocked her, they still whispered behind her back. The words weren't as loud now, but they were sharper, filled with disbelief and jealousy. Sarah could feel their eyes on her whenever she walked into a room. She could sense the judgment in the air. It wasn't a welcoming feeling, but she wasn't here for acceptance. She was here to prove that humans could fight and thrive alongside the galaxy's best warriors. One afternoon, as Sarah walked toward the mess hall, a group of cadets, some of the same ones who had mocked her before, stood blocking the entrance. They were laughing loudly, clearly not trying to hide their amusement as they saw her approach. Sarah could hear snippets of their conversation. "Did you see how slow she was during the last test?" one cadet said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I bet she can't even keep up with the real soldiers." Another cadet chuckled. "I bet she's only here because she's human. No one actually thinks she's ready for real combat." Sarah didn't flinch. She had heard these comments before. They still stung, but she knew better than to let them show. Her goal wasn't to make friends. It was to show that humans weren't as weak as they thought. The best way to do that was to keep moving forward. She walked past the group, her head held high, not bothering to respond. She wasn't interested in arguing. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. Later that evening, the cadets gathered in the training yard for their next challenge. A simulated battle against a rival academy's best students. Sarah's team, assigned to the human cadets, was pitted against some of the most elite fighters from other species. Her teammates were a mix of alien cadets, each with their own set of skills. Some were strong, others faster, and some had advanced tech that gave them an edge in combat. Sarah wasn't part of the elite group, but she knew that didn't matter. The mission was clear: outsmart the enemy and win the battle. As the simulation began, the cadets dove into the fight, using everything at their disposal. Sarah stayed back, carefully studying the battlefield. She had learned that brute force wasn't always the answer. Sometimes, the key to victory was understanding your opponent and using their weaknesses against them. Her strategy was simple: split the enemy's forces and take out their communications first. But as she moved into position, a group of alien cadets from her team laughed as they saw her approach. "Are you sure you want to play strategist, human?" one of them called out. "You should leave the heavy lifting to us." The mocking was subtle, but Sarah didn't care. She had already made up her mind. She was going to prove them wrong. Sarah executed her plan with precision, silently taking out the enemy's communications equipment. Her teammates were surprised, but they followed her lead. The enemy's coordination faltered, and their attacks became scattered. As the battle raged on, Sarah's team began to gain the upper hand. One by one, the rival cadets were eliminated. Finally, Sarah's team stood victorious, the others panting and exhausted. Sarah's heart raced, but she didn't smile. She hadn't won for praise. She had won to show that the human cadet wasn't a joke. As the others caught their breath and congratulated each other, Sarah stood quietly, looking at the wreckage of the battlefield. She could hear whispers again, but this time, they were different. They weren't mocking her. They were questioning how a human could outsmart a team of highly trained cadets. She didn't need their approval. She just needed to keep proving herself. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the academy grounds, casting long shadows across the training field. Today was different. The cadets had been warned about a surprise challenge, but no one knew what it would be. Sarah stood among her fellow cadets, her heart beating faster than usual. She had gotten used to the tests, but this time, the stakes felt higher. The instructor, the same intimidating alien with 3 eyes who had overseen their previous tests, stepped forward. His cold gaze swept over the cadets, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Today," he said, his voice deep and heavy, "you will face a new kind of test. This is not about strength, speed, or tactics. This is about your ability to think on your feet, adapt, and survive under pressure." Sarah's grip tightened on her training weapon. She had learned how to deal with physical challenges, but this sounded different. She wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was certain: she was ready. The instructor continued, "You will be facing real threats, creatures that are trained for combat. They will appear on this field, and your objective is to neutralize them. You may use whatever tactics you've learned, but remember, the goal is survival. You can't win this by brute force alone." A hush fell over the cadets. The mention of real threats made Sarah's stomach twist. This wasn't going to be an easy simulation. She could feel the weight of the challenge pressing down on her, but she pushed the fear aside. She had faced dangerous situations before, and she could do it again. Without another word, the instructor gestured to the field. The ground trembled slightly, and the sky darkened as a series of loud, mechanical clicks echoed across the area. Suddenly, the ground cracked open, and strange, terrifying creatures began to emerge from hidden tunnels. The creatures were enormous, each one a combination of different alien species, with sharp claws, glowing eyes, and thick armored skin. They roared as they leaped into action, charging toward the cadets with terrifying speed. Sarah's heart raced, but she didn't panic. She quickly analyzed the situation. The other cadets. The days that followed were filled with a mix of respect and curiosity. Sarah had proven herself in several tests, but there was still a lingering doubt in the air. While many of the cadets were no longer openly mocking her, some still whispered behind her back, wondering if her victories had been mere luck. Sarah didn't care. She wasn't here to convince anyone of her worth. She was here to earn it. The next challenge was scheduled to be the toughest yet, a full-scale battle simulation. The cadets would be divided into teams and sent into a complex, hazardous environment filled with traps, obstacles, and enemy forces. The goal was simple: to survive and eliminate the opposing team. But the stakes were higher this time. The academy had brought in instructors from other military academies to watch, and everyone knew that this battle would be the turning point for many cadets. Sarah's heart raced as she suited up, adjusting the heavy combat armor. She wasn't nervous, but she couldn't ignore the weight of the situation. This battle would test everything she had learned, from strategy to leadership. She could feel the eyes of her fellow cadets on her as she stood ready, waiting for the signal to begin. "Remember, cadets," the instructor's voice boomed over the comms. "This is no ordinary simulation. Expect real dangers. Expect real consequences. And most importantly, expect the unexpected." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the battlefield. It was an abandoned city, filled with broken buildings and crumbled streets. The perfect environment for ambushes and surprise attacks. Her team was made up of 3 other cadets, an alien with massive, clawed hands, a sleek, fast-moving humanoid, and a tech expert who could hack into enemy systems. They were ready, but Sarah knew that this wasn't going to be easy. The other team, led by one of the top cadets from another species, was ruthless. They had already demonstrated their strength in previous tests, and Sarah's team would have to be sharp if they wanted to survive. The simulation began with a loud bang, signaling the start of the battle. Sarah's team moved quickly, sticking to cover and using their surroundings to their advantage. The enemy was somewhere out there, waiting to make their move. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire rang out. The sleek humanoid cadet, who had been scouting ahead, dropped to the ground, wounded. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. There was no time to hesitate. She had to act. "Cover me," she shouted to the others, and without a second thought, she dashed forward, using the wreckage of a collapsed building as a shield. The battle raged around her. Explosions shook the ground, and blaster fire lit up the air. Sarah kept her focus, staying low to the ground as she made her way to the fallen cadet. The tech expert had already started to work on the enemy's security systems, attempting to disable their weapons. But it was clear that they were outnumbered. Sarah reached the wounded cadet and helped him to his feet, pulling him toward safety behind a large piece of debris. The cadet, though injured, managed to grin. "You really are something, human," he said between labored breaths. Sarah didn't smile. She was focused. This battle wasn't over yet. She knew the enemy team would regroup and counterattack, but she also knew they had a chance if they could stay together. As the minutes ticked by, the enemy's ambushes grew more sophisticated, but Sarah's team fought back with precision. The alien with the claws cleared a path through the enemy's ranks, while the tech expert hacked into their weapons, disabling them one by one. Sarah led the charge, using her knowledge of tactics to keep her team one step ahead. Finally, after what felt like hours, the enemy team was broken. The simulation ended, and the arena went silent. Sarah's team stood victorious, but they were exhausted and battered. The instructor's voice came over the comms again, his tone more serious than usual. "Well done, cadets. The enemy was tough, but you showed real teamwork and skill. And as for you, human." There was a pause, and Sarah's heart skipped. She had seen the look in his eyes before, the one that told her he was impressed. "You are not what I expected. You've proven that humans can fight on equal terms with any species. Your combat scores will reflect that." Sarah's body sagged with relief. She had done it, not just for herself, but for all the humans who would come after her. The respect she had earned today wasn't just from her peers. It was from the galaxy itself. As the cadets slowly made their way out of the simulation area, Sarah felt the shift. The whispers had stopped. Now, there were only nods of approval and looks of respect. She had earned her place in the academy, and no one would question it again. After the intense battle simulation, Sarah felt a strange mix of exhaustion and pride. The academy had been pushing them hard, testing their limits, and yet she had proven herself time and again. Her team's victory over the rival cadets had earned her respect, but that respect also brought new challenges. Sarah knew that the real test wasn't just about surviving the tests. It was about leading others. The next morning, the instructor gathered the cadets for an announcement. The air was tense, filled with nervous anticipation. Sarah stood with her teammates, the same ones who had fought beside her in the previous simulation. They were all silent, waiting for the instructor to speak. "You have all done well," the instructor began, his voice echoing across the training yard. "But today, I will assign leadership roles. We need someone to lead a high-risk operation tomorrow, and I have decided that the human cadet, Sarah Harper, will be the one to take command." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this, to lead a team. She had only been a cadet for a short time, and now she was expected to guide others through a dangerous mission. Her fellow cadets, once mocking her, now turned to her with a mix of surprise and curiosity. The instructor's decision was final, and there was no turning back. The assignment was clear. Sarah and her team would infiltrate a simulated enemy base, recover critical intelligence, and escape undetected. It sounded simple enough, but Sarah knew better. The Academy simulations were anything but easy. This mission would test her ability to think under pressure, strategize on the fly, and make quick decisions with the lives of her teammates in her hands. After the briefing, Sarah gathered her team in the strategy room. They were all quiet, unsure of what to expect from their new leader. Sarah could feel the weight of their gazes, their silent judgment. She wasn't just leading them to victory, she was leading them to survival. "We'll approach this as a team," Sarah said, her voice steady but firm. "I may be in charge, but we all have a role to play. Our goal is to be smart, not fast. We need to stick together, and if we get separated, we regroup." The tech expert, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, nodded. "I'll take care of the communications. I can jam their sensors and disable their security systems." The alien with the claws spoke next. "I'll clear the path if we encounter enemies. I'm not afraid to fight." Sarah turned to the sleek humanoid cadet. "And you?" "I'll scout ahead," the cadet replied, a confident smile on his face. "You can count on me." Sarah nodded. "Good. We move out at 600 hours. Stay alert, stay sharp, and remember, our mission is to get in and out without leaving a trace." The night before the mission, Sarah lay awake in her bunk, staring up at the ceiling. She thought about the pressure she was under. Leading a team was a huge responsibility. It wasn't just about making the right decisions. It was about inspiring confidence, about ensuring that each cadet knew they could trust her when things went wrong. It was a lot to carry, but she had no choice. She had to do it. The next morning, the team was ready. They donned their armor, checked their weapons, and moved out under the cover of darkness. The simulated enemy base loomed ahead, a maze of steel and concrete. The mission had begun. Sarah led her team into the base, staying low and using the shadows to hide their movements. Her mind was sharp, constantly analyzing their surroundings, watching for any sign of danger. Every step counted. Every decision was critical. As they advanced, they encountered their first obstacle, an enemy patrol. Sarah motioned for her team to stop. The sleek cadet crouched low and slipped forward, scouting the path. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for the report. "They're moving away," the cadet whispered in her earpiece. "We have a clear shot." Sarah nodded. "We move now. Stay quiet." The team advanced, moving swiftly and quietly. Sarah's decisions were quick and precise, each move calculated to ensure the success of the mission. The tech expert jammed enemy communications, ensuring the team was undetected as they moved deeper into the base. They reached their objective, an encrypted data terminal holding valuable intelligence. Sarah ordered the tech expert to work quickly, and the cadet went to work, hacking into the system. It was a tense few minutes, but when the data was finally secured, Sarah knew the hardest part was still to come: the escape. The enemy would be on high alert now. They had to move quickly and avoid detection at all costs. Sarah's mind raced as they made their way back through the base. But this time, they weren't as lucky. They ran into an enemy patrol. The situation was critical. Sarah's team had to fight their way out. The mission had been a success, but it hadn't been easy. Sarah's heart still raced as she walked out of the simulation area with her team. The adrenaline was slowly wearing off, and the weight of everything they had accomplished began to settle in. They had made it. They had completed the mission, and they had done it together. Sarah glanced at her team as they walked alongside her. The alien with the claws was walking with a slight limp, a mark of the fight they had just won. The sleek Cadet, normally so quick and graceful, had a bruised arm, but was smiling nonetheless. The tech expert was adjusting his gear, his eyes bright with excitement. Despite the bruises, cuts, and exhaustion, there was a sense of pride in the air. They had faced real danger, and they had come out on top. Sarah had led them, and they had followed. No one had expected them to succeed, least of all the other cadets, but they had done it. As they entered the debriefing room, the instructor stood at the front, his arms crossed, and a stern look on his face. The cadets filed in, the tension palpable. The instructor didn't say anything at first, just watched them with his piercing eyes. Sarah stood at the front of the room, facing him. She wasn't nervous this time. She had led her team through the mission, and now it was time to hear their results. "You've completed the mission," the instructor said finally. His voice was steady but carried an authority that made the room go silent. "You've proven yourselves today. Your teamwork, your strategy, your ability to adapt under pressure. This is what I've been waiting for." Sarah felt a wave of pride wash over her. The instructor's approval meant everything to her. But then, he added something that surprised her. "Especially you, Sarah Harper," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. "You've shown something none of us expected. You've proven that humans can lead, that humans can think and fight with the best of them. Your combat scores will be recorded, and from today, no one will doubt that you belong here." The room was quiet for a moment, but then the cadets began to nod, some of them even offering small smiles. They had seen it for themselves. Sarah had earned her place. The instructor turned away for a moment, tapping a few commands into his console. Then he looked up again. "You've earned a leadership role," he said, his voice softer now. "From now on, you'll be assigned missions where you'll lead other cadets. You'll be expected to keep improving, to keep growing." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with both excitement and responsibility. She had done it. She had proven herself as a leader. She had proven that humans were more than capable of holding their own in this galaxy. After the debriefing, Sarah's team gathered around her. The sleek cadet, who had been so skeptical at first, clapped her on the back. "You really know how to lead, Sarah," he said with a grin. "I think we all owe you a drink tonight." Sarah smiled. It was the first time she had truly felt accepted. The team no longer saw her as an outsider, but as someone they could trust, as someone who had earned her place, just like they had. As they walked out of the debriefing room together, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had come from being the underdog, laughed at and doubted by everyone, to standing as a leader in front of her peers, and she wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. There were more challenges ahead, more missions to lead, and more victories to claim. But for the first time, Sarah didn't feel like she was fighting alone. She was part of a team, an equal, and that was all she needed to keep moving forward. The days following Sarah's promotion felt like a blur. The academy had become both familiar and foreign to her at the same time. As a leader now, she felt a new weight on her shoulders, a responsibility that went beyond just surviving the tests. It was about guiding her team, making sure they had the confidence to succeed, and making the right calls when things went wrong. Today was different. Today, the final test was waiting. It wasn't like the other simulations, where the stakes were high but contained. This was the ultimate challenge. The cadets would face their toughest test yet, a mission designed to push every part of their training to its limits. This time, they would be put in a real-world combat scenario, with real consequences and no room for error. Sarah stood in front of her team, ready to brief them. Her heart raced. The instructor had warned them that this test would be unlike anything they had faced before. This was their chance to prove they were ready for the real dangers out there, beyond the academy walls. Her team stood at attention. The sleek cadet, the tech expert, and the alien with claws, all waiting for Sarah's orders. They had trained together for months now, and she could sense that they were all depending on her. They trusted her, and that trust was something she couldn't afford to lose. "Listen up," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Today, we're going up against an enemy force much stronger than us. We don't have the advantage of numbers or firepower. Our only advantage is our ability to think and work together. We stick to the plan, no matter what." The team nodded, their expressions serious. There was no more joking, no more doubts. They were ready. The simulation began. The team was dropped into an unfamiliar environment, an alien planet with jagged mountains and thick fog. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of wet earth and ozone. The ground shook beneath their feet as if something enormous was lurking below. "We need to move fast," Sarah said, taking the lead. "We had a limited time to secure our objective, and the enemy is closing in on us." The team advanced cautiously, using the fog to cover their movements. Sarah kept an eye on her surroundings, aware that every decision could mean the difference between life and death. They made their way through the rocky terrain, following the course they had planned. But Sarah knew better than to expect everything to go smoothly. This wasn't just another practice session. It was the real deal. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled again, stronger this time. The enemy had found them. "We've got company," the tech expert whispered, already tapping into the communication systems. "I can't jam their signals. This is a full-scale attack. They're tracking us." The enemy forces, a squad of alien soldiers, appeared through the mist. They were fast, their armor nearly invisible in the fog. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she quickly assessed the situation. There were too many of them, and they were closing in fast. "Everyone, spread out," Sarah ordered. "We can't fight them head-on. Use the terrain. Draw them in." The battle started almost immediately. The alien cadet with the claws charged forward, taking down the first enemy soldier with ease. The sleek cadet darted between rocks, using his speed to stay out of sight while picking off enemies one by one. The tech expert hacked into the enemy systems, causing their weapons to malfunction at critical moments. The tension was unbearable. Sarah's team fought back fiercely, using everything they had learned. But the enemy wasn't giving up easily. The cadet with claws was injured, but he kept fighting, refusing to stop. The tech expert's equipment was failing, and the sleek cadet had been surrounded. Sarah knew this was the moment. The decision she made now would determine if they survived. Without a second thought, she called for a retreat. "Fall back to the ridge," she shouted. "Regroup now." It was a gamble, but it was their only chance. The team followed her lead, moving quickly to higher ground. The enemy tried to pursue, but the terrain worked in their favor. Sarah's team managed to break free, leaving the enemy with only a small amount of ground to gain. They reached the extraction point just in time. As they boarded the transport ship, their bodies bruised and tired, they realized the full weight of what they had just accomplished. The instructor's voice came over their comms. "You've completed the final test. The results will be reviewed, but I can already tell, each of you has earned your place. The Academy has been waiting for cadets like you." Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She had led her team through the toughest test yet, and they had made it. They had passed. She looked at her teammates, bloodied, battered, but alive. They had done it together, and that was what mattered. The Academy had no more doubts, and neither did she. The Academy was silent as Sarah stood before the council of senior instructors. It was the same room where she had once been judged by her peers, mocked by the others who believed she didn't belong. But now it felt different. The air was filled with a sense of anticipation, and this time, the eyes watching her were filled with respect, not disbelief. The final test had been brutal. Sarah and her team had faced overwhelming odds, but they had succeeded. They had worked together, fought hard, and led with intelligence rather than just strength. Now it was time for the next step. The senior instructor, the one who had doubted her abilities in the beginning, stood at the head of the table. His gaze was steady, but there was a glint of something in his eyes. Approval, perhaps even admiration. "Sarah Harper," he began, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "your performance during the final test was nothing short of extraordinary. You led your team with a level of strategy and composure that surpassed expectations. You have proven yourself not only as a capable cadet, but as a leader." Sarah stood still, her heart racing. She had heard these words from her team, but hearing them from the instructor, someone who had once doubted her, meant more than she could explain. She had worked for this moment. She had fought through the doubts, the challenges, and the mockery. And now she had earned her place. From today forward, the instructor continued, you will be assigned to lead specialized missions. Your next steps will take you beyond the Academy's training grounds. You will represent the human cadets in the real challenges ahead. Sarah's mind raced. This was it. This was the beginning of something much bigger than anything she had imagined. She wasn't just a cadet anymore. She was a leader. And soon, she would be sent into the field, facing real combat alongside the best soldiers from across the galaxy. Her heart beat faster at the thought. "As for your team," the instructor said, turning his gaze toward the others in the room, "they've shown exceptional loyalty and teamwork under your leadership. You've earned their respect. Together, you'll go far." The other cadets in the room, who had once been skeptical, now nodded at Sarah, their expressions full of respect. She could see it in their eyes, the realization that they were witnessing the start of something powerful. Later, as Sarah walked out of the room with her team, she could feel the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. But it didn't feel heavy. It felt right. For the first time, she truly understood what it meant to be a leader, not just a fighter, but someone who could guide others, make decisions in the heat of the moment, and inspire those around her. Her team gathered around her, each one wearing a look of pride. "You did it, Sarah," the sleek cadet said with a grin. "You really proved them wrong." "We did it," Sarah corrected him, her voice steady. "We all did. We're a team." The alien with the claws nodded in agreement. "I fought with the best, and you, Sarah, are one of them." Sarah smiled. The journey had been long, but it had brought her to this moment. She had earned her place among the strongest, and now she was ready for whatever lay ahead. She wasn't just a human cadet anymore. She was a leader, a warrior, and part of something much bigger than herself. As the sun set over the Academy, casting a warm golden glow across the training fields, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. There would be more battles, more challenges, and more victories. But she was ready. And together with her team, she would face whatever the galaxy had to offer.